Yeah, we are here talking about really how to experience community. I'm Juno, I'm the lead guy here, and before I dive into the message, let me walk over here to our thermometer and add another $6,000 that was given by you folks this past week. So that makes it about, we only need about $13,000 more for our large video screen to be installed here. And again, we're gearing for that hopefully before Christmas. And so again, thanks for your wonderful contributions and generosity to help make that possible. Again, it is good to be back here. I was here last week, and when I'm gone, I always stream in to catch what's happening, making sure either of the Ryans aren't saying something about me, and I can enjoy the worship. Whoever I'm with, they're amazed at what they hear through my little telephone about our worship. And while that's a benefit, and while I appreciate it, and while that's the church claiming the technology back to Jesus, there's still nothing better than actually being here and being among you. So it is good to be back and just to hear your stories. You know, some of them are good, some of the sad ones. You know, this afternoon I'm doing the funeral for Pete's mom, which will be his mom and her mother-in-law. That's going to happen this afternoon here at 2. And so it's not always good things, but it's definitely good to be back. Again, our goal over since September-ish has been to help people to zero in and to think biblically about this thing called community. We hear it a lot. You hear it at your places of employment. We hear it about neighborhoods and about cities. Everybody wants community. And so we wanted to be sure to dive into what we feel Scripture tells us about community. And again, I know as staff, as we hear words from people and we hear what's happening in their community, it is indeed it's just a wonderful source of encouragement. And we do our best to bring those stories up to you. Last week, Ryan last couple of weeks, he's talked about community. We've talked about it from the perspective of diversity, and that we really are stronger together. He talked about it last week about being an intergenerational community. And again, we really are stronger together as we mix it up on the ages. And we know that's more difficult at times. And we know we get feedback at times saying, I just really prefer this and I just really prefer that. But we as a staff and as a board really feel that intergenerationally is really what is going to be in heaven. And that there are many benefits from worshiping intergenerationally, about learning tolerance for both ends of the spectrum, learning respect from both ends of the spectrum. And it really keeps us from that slippery slope of thinking worship is all about me and what I want and what my desires are. And so that's why we continue to worship intergenerationally. And as Ryan talked about in November, we're going to have our worship experience here, worship evening here. And again, it is a wonderful, wonderful experience. We're going to be in the round, and meaning worship people will be down there, and we're going to change the chairs around for us. And I just challenge you to be intentional. We know most of the things in our life, whether it's you're reminding yourself to send your wife a card so you don't have conflict, or whether it's to remember to pay the bills so you don't have conflict, we just need to be intentional. And so just write it on your calendar now and mark it down for November 20th, I think it was. Again, you can go to our app to figure that out. Well, today I am going to be talking about the subject that for some of you just want to plug your ears to, and you just want to scream, no! And it's that 8-letter word that some would call a dirty word, and that is called conflict. I put it out on Facebook this week. Hey, when you think of conflict, what do you think of? And let's take a look at the screens at some of their comments. That last person must have been smoking something when they said that. And again, as you can tell just from those comments, and I think from some of your own emotions, the idea of conflict really just opens up a whole box or a whole bag of some feelings and emotions. But because it may even be an uncomfortable feeling, it's sort of like going to the dentist. You know we need to. And if we avoid it, we are going to be in much more pain and anguish further down the line. And so it is with conflict. It's a necessary part of life. It is natural, but if we ignore it, it is going to be much more painful for us and our relationships. Let me pray. Lord, for this, our community, thank you. And while we indeed have conflict, our world remains relatively calm here in the United States as compared to other parts and other countries. Thank you that we don't need to block our ears and to protect our loved ones from missiles and from bombs exploding. And while we don't all agree on this subject of politics, let us not take for granted the freedoms we have in our homes, in our schools, in our offices, even in the political arenas to disagree, and well beyond that. Forgive us for taking for granted the freedom that we have to even gather together today without the fear of persecution. Help us to be good stewards of the gifts that you have given to each and every one of us. Help us to use those gifts to bring about your good news on earth as it is in heaven. And Lord, I know as we dive into this subject of conflict in community, I just pray that you're going to help us to set aside some of our bad experiences and to lean on your words to give us insights and perspective, and to lean into our life groups for encouragement and hope. And may the thoughts that are floating around in all of the minds here this morning, may those thoughts of people who are even questioning you and your existence, and may the words of my mouth be acceptable in your sight, since you are the one that can redeem conflict and make it a healthy part of our lives. Amen. And again, I am guessing this morning that you're really able to sit there and think, yep, I know where this is going. And it really is my desire that we move conflict from the gut-wrenching, nausea-producing, sweating-producing word that it is, to make it a place where you can make it a part of our lives where you can think, okay, looks like we got to step into something. And maybe it's an opportunity to grow, and maybe it's an opportunity to even develop my character a little deeper. And I'm thinking as we begin this subject, that maybe we just simply need to reframe the word conflict. Maybe we need to run it through a different filter or a different lens, so to speak. And in fact, we do that often. We really do refilter or reprogram our minds and our hearts to different experiences in life. And even, let's take marriage. And these are no hand-raising examples. For some of you, your parents, their marriage was absolutely horrible. And so as you thought about marriage, you needed to rethink what that is. And that's what marriage counseling and pre-marriage stuff is all about. To help you both come to a realization of your experiences and what you are bringing in. And maybe you need to reframe the roles of a husband. Maybe you need to reframe the roles of a wife and the traditional things that everybody thinks. Just using the words brothers or sisters. When I was in high school, the young lady she wasn't young, she was my age. Anyway, way back then, she said, let's double date with my sister and her boyfriend. I'm like, no way. I mean, I had 3 sisters, and you couldn't pay me to double date. I mean, why would you? It just didn't make sense. At least in my family, at least at that time. But it did, and I had to learn to reframe what sisters were all about. I mean, they really could be fun and healthy and encouraging to one another. In fact, her grandparents lived with them. And man, I was just being stretched in all ways. I'm going, why is your grandma here? Doesn't that get a little intrusive at times? And, but I tell you, grandmas can make a great addition to the nuclear family. I mean, they can serve and they can love and they can cook, and they were wonderful to this family. And so even in high school, I realized the benefits of being intergenerational. And when I went to give grandma a birthday card, my girlfriend said, that's not appropriate for my grandma. I go, well, I think it's pretty funny. And she goes, oh, not for my grandma. And so I had to reframe and rethink birthday cards to elderly people that weren't my grandma and didn't know my wonderful sense of humor. And what about the church? I'm guessing some of you have had to reframe what the church is. Now, for some of you, it's been a place of family, of warmth, of acceptance, and of love. And for others of you, it's been the exact opposite of that. It's been a place of persecution. It's been a place of condemning. For those of you who have been through the pain of a divorce, the church is often the place, at least years ago, often the place that you couldn't come into because you were divorced. If you smoked, if you had a beer, the church was not accepting of you. If you listen to country music, the church is not accepting. Still today. No, just joking on that one. So forgive me for all of you country music lovers, and that's an oxymoron in my mind. But anyway, all I'm saying is that you need to reframe things, don't we? Whether it's your family, your marriage at times. When we think of church, I think of very positive things, but I have some people I know that the last thing they would associate with the church is the word positive. And so as we dive into this idea of conflict, I think for those of you who may have related to many of those words on the screen about, again, nauseating, fear, pain, that if you reframed it a little bit, that may help you. And I know this, for many of you, this whole subject probably should be a 4-week sermon series. But for many of you, your reframing is too light of a word. You really need to detox yourself of the pain that has gone on in your life around that word conflict, around that word disagreement. Again, from my own experiences, I had a wonderful mother-in-law. And whenever we would ask her, where do you want to go to eat? Her response was, I don't care. You decide. Well, she had grown up in a church environment where everything came from the guy. And so she always deferred to me as, you make the decision. No, Mom, it's your birthday. You make the decision. And yet, it had been ingrained in her so much not to have conflict with the head of a family that it took months for her to change and to realize it's okay if she wanted to go to Sizzler Steak again, and that's the last place we wanted to go. But we went for Mom because it was her birthday, and it taught us tolerance. And that once in a while there is a good salad bar out there someplace. So again, what I'm saying is that you need to decide if your experiences with conflict and the pain that's been instilled to you, and even in the workplace, when employers ask for your opinion and you disagree and they jump down your throat, you're just like, see, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. Because disagreeing really gets me nowhere. Well, let's take a look at Proverbs 16:28. It really warns us about the danger of some unhealthy conflict. It says, a perverse person stirs up conflict, and a gossip separates close friends. A perverse person stirs up conflict. Pretty self-explanatory, I think. And remember, we are called to be the light of the world, and we are not called to have our friends put a light over our bushel. We are to be the light of the world, and yet conflict often does that. If you are being influenced by, the idea of perverse, perverse is really somebody who is difficult, uncooperative, unreasonable. So promise me at this Thanksgiving, you are not going to go to your in-laws or somebody and say, you are perverse. That'll make for a great Thanksgiving meal, trust me. But really, we all know people that's all they are. And they just stir up conflict. There's nothing positive that comes out of their mouth. No matter what, nothing is positive, and they are difficult, they are uncooperative, they are unreasonable. And again, the writer calls that type of a person perverse. And so for us, we need to then reevaluate some of maybe our own actions. Well, why we would love to control that perverse person. That's a pretty strong word, isn't it? While we'd like to control him or her, we can't. But we can control our responses to him or her. And again, what's that old thing? I'm sure I'm dating myself, talk to the hand because the face ain't listening or something like that. That's not the quite way to handle it, but internally, that's really what you need to do. Maybe you need to limit your time around this person. We have found misery likes company. And so you just need to think ahead to know, I'm going to I'm going to be with this person. And so get another family member that can, together, the two of you can keep each other positive and in the right place versus letting whoever destroy the entire day. Maybe you need to actually, if it's a friend of yours that you love dearly, maybe you need to say, you know what, let's grab coffee, but let's not talk about this subject. They'll go, but why? And say, well, because I just don't think it's a healthy conversation. And you can just leave it at that. And maybe for some people, it's like, you know what, and maybe this is more with some family. You know, you're always complaining about so-and-so. I would much rather, let's have a conversation about what's going on in your life. Now, those people would probably drop dead if you said that. Because we don't talk like that normally. Well, I'm just saying maybe it's time to change the norm so that we don't get sucked up into this whole deal of some conflict that really turns negative and that we can't control it. Again, this passage also mentions gossip and how that separates, just close friends. And you know the truth in this saying that it's easier to talk about somebody than it is to talk to somebody. And that's what the whole gossip thing is. If you don't like my blue jacket, you can tell me that. But if you go to your whole life group and say, what's the deal with Pastor wearing that blue jacket? That's conflict. That's divisive. That's really not healthy at all. And so we just need, not that anyone's complaining about my jacket. Some of you are probably thinking, hallelujah, he wore a jacket. There is a God. It's not your funeral and you wore a jacket. So again, let's just be careful that we don't turn our opinion into gossip with our own friends. Because the disadvantage of social media is that it's a floodgate for everybody giving their opinion. And yet in reality, nobody's really asking for it. And that's how the whole gossip train starts. Let's look at James chapter 1, verse 19. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. Gosh, isn't that just common sense? And doesn't that give us the reminder that God gave us 2 ears to listen and 1 mouth to speak? And yet, I'm convinced that some people just don't listen. And that's why you have those in corporate America. We had those reflective listening exercises. And if you go to any type of counseling, relational counseling, you're going to probably have some of those reflective sessions. Now repeat back, what did he say? Well, he didn't say that. What did he say? What did she say? When my daughter was little, and she would be sitting on my lap, and she's talking, and when she was little, the internet was just coming into being, and she would hear the keystrokes. And then she would just take her 2 little hands and move my face to hers so that we had eye contact. And then as she grew older, she would say, as she's talking, and let's face it, parents, sometimes kids talk, and some have the gift of talking, and they just talk and talk. And she would say, the rule, very sternly and loud, the rule of the family is that when somebody's talking, you need to listen. You need to look. I am talking, so you need to look at me. And I'm thinking, good luck for whoever she marries. He'll get a great young lady. But anyway, that's the thing, is that we need to listen. And we know the multitasking thing is probably a myth, that the best way to listen is to actually look at the people. And that, if you're in a classroom, you look at the teacher talking. If you're in worship, you look at the pastor talking. If you're in a seminar and your boss is talking, you look at him. Because we know that the minute we try to multitask, I'll just shoot off this quick email, that you're missing something. And it's usually at the end of the meeting, you've heard it all, you've been there, and you're thinking, yeah, he or she's not going to say anything really that important. And you start to disengage and start to plan your action steps, and sure enough, you've missed some dates that were said. And so one way, again, to avoid conflict is to simply listen. Listen to what was said, and maybe even listen to what was not said. Again, for many of us, we don't even give it a second thought at to what's not being said. And so you can listen beyond the words to their body language, to their tears, to their excitement. And you can say, Juno, you're pretty excited about that. Joe, I see that really disturbs you still. Or Gladys, you're pretty frustrated by that. I can just tell by the tone in your voice. Let's look at what our friend Paul says in Philippians 2:4. Again, he gives some great insight to working through conflict. Not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. Don't you just want to hit delete? I mean, that's a pretty tough command for us. And yet when we are confused, when we're frustrated, when wires get crossed, it's a little bit easier and more productive to say, well, help me understand. Versus, what in the world were you thinking, idiot? Where was your head? Didn't we already talk about that? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you put it in your calendar? You have your little phone, your little smartphone. Just put the alarm in there and you would have known. I mean, those are all true feelings. That doesn't mean you need to express them. But rather just to say, help me to understand, just really gets us through a whole lot of dialogue. When I was in Michigan, I was having several emails to the company in charge of our solar project. And I just finally said, hey, when I get back, let's meet and let's talk. I've never met you folks, and I think we need a face-to-face. So we met this week, and I says, I don't want your jobs. You folks are dealing with financing that is so far beyond what I'm able to deal with, and the technology, don't even try to explain it to me, but just help me to understand. We signed the contract almost a year ago, and I'm still paying top dollar for electricity. And they explained it, they were kind, they agreed, they understood. Again, they explained where nothing was on our fault, thank the Lord, but internally some things. And his last comment was, well, Pastor, what else do you need from us? What else can we do to help with this? And I says, well, does the 6th or 7th month delay equate to a donation from your company? I go, we're doing our Vision 2020, and they both laughed, didn't give me a check, but at least we talked about it. But anyway, you know what? Because we've been waiting forever in my mind, and you just can't start the conversation that way. It probably would have gone nowhere. So we're good, and they assure me that by December 31st, we will be up and running on solar. Back in the day when I used to do, this would have been, my daughter's 26, so 26 years ago, premarital counseling. I don't do it anymore. I farm it out to the professionals. Pre-marriage counseling 26 years ago is a little different than what it is now. And my ego isn't involved to say, you know what, there are professionals out there that have studied their whole life and are into this pre-marriage counseling stuff. And so why don't you just talk with them, and I'll be happy to talk with you about the service. But in those conversations, so tell me about conflict. When have you guys been in a big fight? And they're like, almost like Sarah and Ryan joked about today, oh, Pastor, we love each other so much. We're so much alike. We've never had conflict. And I'm going, you've got to be kidding me. I'm thinking, they're thinking conflict is a bad word, and I don't care what they fought about. It could be about what's going to be on the pizza. But how did you process it is the key question. And so, again, most young couples, they just thought conflict was a bad thing and had to do everything they could to avoid it. Again, they called it, we've had a disagreement, but we haven't had conflict. We don't agree on this, but we've never had conflict. And again, it's not something to avoid, but as you hear about so many things about the grieving process, just lean into it. If you're scared I still don't buy that argument. Like, I got this thing about snakes, and so some would say, you need to go to a zoo and pick up one of those things. Hey, Joy, I'm not going to lean into that problem. But with conflict, you need to lean into it. It's normal. It's healthy if it's handled properly. And again, I know for some of you, it's a deep-seated challenge to even do that because of really the abuse you've had about disagreement. But I also feel that without healthy conflict, you're just going to be on the surface of things. In your friendships, in your marriage, in your life groups, even in your relationships at work, if everybody is just avoiding anything that's controversial or not, any conflict, opportunities are missed. And so the idea is, what can we do to have this conversation? So again, some little one-liners is to say, hey, let's have the conversation. Not that you have ticked me off one last time. Get in my office, we need to talk. That's not a good way to set up the conversation. Or to say, you know what, we're not on the same page. Or what's your, again, for couples and families. So what's your expectation for the vacation? What's your expectation when everybody comes over for Thanksgiving? And so you can talk through some of those basic expectations. And so then rather than having the conflict in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner, you've talked through all those things to avoid it. And so you realize it really wasn't a bad thing at all. And so one of the takeaways from today is the idea that conflict, if handled properly, is good and is healthy and really can cause us all to grow more and more into the person that God wants us to be. We're human. We are going to make mistakes. Every one of you, every one of you, us, we will be making mistakes. We're human. They're going to happen. Conflict is going to happen. So let's just work through it. Let's gain an understanding, and let's move forward. And I also know, again, this is why this really could have been a 4-part series, that there are different levels of conflict. There's the relational level. There's the scheduling level. Oh, I double booked. Talked to a friend this week, double booked. So he had to rearrange his schedule. Yep, that was a conflict. And you can handle that a little differently than if you and your spouse, butt heads about an issue. Well, there's the level of conflict where there's literally been an abusive situation. That takes a whole nother conversation to help give some tips to. But again, we are human, and it's going to be a part of our relationships. So don't run from it. Don't think it's a bad relationship. Don't think you got to flush the friendship down the toilet because, you've had this conflict now. No, let's work it out. Let's figure this thing out. There's a pastor, Jay Firebaugh, out of Ohio, and he's at a church called New Life. I thought that was pretty interesting. He says these things: more than being afraid of conflict, we're afraid of ugly conflict. But conflict doesn't have to be mean or ugly. Conflict is merely an anxious situation that begs to be resolved. And yet without the conflict, we will never move or progress, and nothing ever gets better. Problems are never identified as problems. Grace, growth, development, ministry, forgiveness never occur. Facing conflict well means doing it with respect and commitment to each other. Without respect and commitment, conflict usually turns ugly. And no wonder some of us hit the road as soon as conflict arises, because no one likes ugly conflict. And seldom is there a winner in ugly conflict. And again, so we are going to disagree. You are going to have disagreements. You are going to have conflict. You are going to have the need for conversations to help smooth over, come to agreement, to work together. And it is really immature and selfish to think everybody is always getting it wrong but me. Or I don't need to bend at all. I'm the father in the family. I'll pick on the dads. I'm the husband. You do what I say. That is not how God has wired us to work through conflict. And then the banner verse, let me read this for you, that many use to help guide them through conflict is Matthew 18:15 through 17. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault. Just between the two of you, if they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Let's look at verse 15 real quickly, because there are ways, if your brother or sister sins, let's jump down to if they, just between the two of you. Some translations will put in, if your brother or sister sins against you. The translations we use does not include that, but that's key for us. Because this way, I think if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault. Well, that's why we become the moral majority, and we think we have to police everybody's behaviors and say, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. But it's really, if a brother or sister sins against me, then I approach them. And it doesn't really mean if a brother or sister has a different opinion, that's okay. It's how we handle that opinion. And if that opinion turns to gossip and divisive behavior, well, then we pick up this passage. Then we go to them first one-on-one. But I think when we see that, when we read that, oh, yes, that makes sense. That's good. That's what the Bible says. But when you're forced to do it, you're just like, oh. Because none of us, when it gets to this point, often it's ugly conflict. And so there are just some ways to avoid that ugly conflict. I'm going to play the faith card here, because I think we avoid conflict because maybe it has to do with our theology about God, that I need to be perfect for God to love me. that I can't do anything wrong for the God of creation to have died for me. And so since conflict is bad and conflict is wrong, this is your thinking, conflict is wrong, I can't be in conflict, so I don't want conflict, and I avoid conflict, and I say there's no conflict, because in reality you're thinking, how can God love me if I have conflict with somebody? But the reality is, folks, God loves us no matter what we've done, no matter what we haven't done. No matter what mess we've gotten ourselves into, God still loves us. And we need to remember that as we enter into this subject of conflict, that the God of creation still loves us, and because of that love, I need to be handling people and situations in a different way versus without the love of God. We need to challenge people probably at times to grow up or grow into their faith a little more to handle some conflict. And why do we do that? It really boils down to the verses that we've talked about often when we talk about community. It's in John 13:34. Let's take a look at that. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And that's, we can have the disagreements. We can have the conflicts. As the world sees us respond to that, they're going to know that the love of Jesus is real. It isn't just some mythical thing that people on Sundays, sing about or sing to. It is core to our witness as well as to how we handle conflict. Now I have a bent with some pastors that tell you what to do, but don't give you a little bit more hands-on. And so again, the take-home is this, and I have a handout that you can get outside, but I'm going to go through just a few tips on how to handle conflict so that it's not a bad thing, it's not a deliberate, that takes you down, but that it really helps to grow you as a believer in Christ. And the first one is this. It's remember that conflict is good. It is what leads people to being closer. It helps our relationships to grow, and they're really brought together as you resolve these conflicts. The second one is you don't have to agree 100% on everything. You just need to reach an understanding that you can both agree to. None of us are clones of each other, so there's going to be differences. But remember, you don't have to agree 100%. Just come to a baseline that you can agree to. Number 3 is in relational conflict, your relationship is more important than this single issue. Even really in marriage, whatever you're arguing about, you're a team, you're working together. Yes, you have this disagreement, but the love you have is more important than that disagreement. Number 4 is to keep talking to each other. Relationships dissolve when we isolate ourselves. And so even if there's a conflict, or not even, when there is a conflict, you need to have that conversation soon after you have the conflict. So if I've had a difficult conversation with somebody at the church, then my job is to make sure I circle back around with them sooner than later. When you have a conflict with your kids, with maybe the students, if you're a teacher, with your spouse, circle back around. If you have a knockdown, drag down with your a colleague at work, circle back around afterwards so they'll know that there's still a relationship there. Number 5, talk to each other, not everybody else. We've already talked about that in the message. Resist the temptation to try to get other people on your side to agree with you. Keep talking to the person you have the disagreement with and not spreading that gossip. Keep to the facts. Don't generalize. Every time, every this, every that, that's just going to ignite some fuel for that fire. You need to own the argument, to say, I feel, we've heard this, I feel threatened. I feel hurt. I feel ignored when this happens. Not when you do this, when you're late for dinner, I feel insulted. You know, when you're late for dinner, you make me feel insulted. No, it's, you know what? I've worked hard on dinner. You're 25 minutes late. My feelings are hurt. Just own them versus blaming the other person. Keep a cool head. Take a break. Yes, even if you say, let's grab dessert. Well, let's get the dishes done and then let's have this conversation. Well, let me finish mowing the lawn. Let's have this conversation. Let me run this errand and I'll come back and I'll be in a better mind. To your kids, it's like, let's talk tomorrow. Get a good night's sleep and we'll talk. To your friends, it's like, let's just take a 10-minute break here. Guys, this is ridiculous. So don't be afraid to ask for those breaks. Keep a cool head when you need to take a break. And then number 8 is, it's okay to fight, but fight fair. Stay away from the cheap blows. Stay away from always blaming their mother for your marriage issues, or his mother, or her mother. Those aren't going to get you anywhere. Just talk with the person across from you. You look them in the eyes and try to come with a resolution. And as we read in Ephesians 4:32, this applies to every situation. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as Christ God forgave you. Yes, you're going to blow it. Own up to it. I'm sorry can get you through a whole lot of conflict. And in that, you'll be able to be new life, not just for the city, but you'll be new life to all of your relationships at home and at work and far beyond. And God's people said, okay, that could have been a 4-week sermon series, but we continue to worship. We continue to engage with God by the giving of our offerings. So in a few moments, we're going to receive your offerings. Again, as a sign that you're not controlled by the almighty dollar, but that you know that everything you have comes from God. Also, during this response time, you'll be able to come forward or go in the back, or we'll have rovers come around if you can't get up to serve you communion. As a reminder that the God of creation, again, loves you for who you are, not for what you do, what you own, where you work. You'll be able to light a candle. Maybe you need to light a candle and say, Lord, help me through this horrible situation. I need your light. I need your love to get me through. And so there's no power in the candle. It's just a great reminder that you've wanted Christ, the light of Christ, to come in to a situation. You're welcome to stand or to sit and to worship. Make some notes and think, okay, Lord, how can you use me to be your light in conflict? And if you're afraid of it, if you've been abused because of it, say, Lord, once again, I give this back to you so that you can use me as an instrument of your grace. Let us worship as the ushers come forward.